Hi, folks. We're going to get started. My name is Patrick Dangler. I am a senior program manager on the Internet Explorer team, and I've been working on the SVG effort for the last bit.
And I'm Doug Sheppers. I'm the I work for W3C, and I'm the W3C team contact for the SVG and the web apps working groups, which is sort of like a project manager on those teams. And I'm the editor of several of the specifications.
He's the SVG head honcho. So we're going to run through today. In fact, I'll probably be talking fairly fast. We have about 80 minutes of material to cram into about 40, 45 minutes here. We'll do a quick history of where SVG came from and where it's going. And then Doug's going to amuse you with a little bit of the state of SVG today and where the spec is and the support that's there. And then I'm going to take back and talk about the way we thought through some of the key scenarios and give a demo of a few of those. If folks had seen the keynote or some of the previous presentations, we may be overlapping a little bit, but I'll talk a little bit about the logic behind that. And then for those that are going to be and do download the platform preview, I'm going to give a little hints about some areas that we don't have there yet, and so you can avoid some of the stumbling blocks that a lot of people run into. So as for the history, you know, it was interesting. I was working in Visual Studio in the mid to late 90s when I think this first big wave of the web of it changing from HTML 3.2 and over to this DHTML and all this great feature set, which, you know, we had kind of helped push out, and it's kind of known as Ajax today. And at that time, this spec called VML we pushed to the W3C, which is Vector Markup Language. And the W3C came back to us, and by the way, we shipped that in IE. It's still in IE. Top sites use it today for pathing, like Bing or Google Maps. But they came back to us and said, you know what, Adobe's got this other thing called PGML. Can you rationalize those two? So we worked with Adobe and a bunch of other companies and essentially put together this spec with a lot of folks called SVG 1.0. And soon after, Adobe provided this plugin for IE, and SVG was off and running on the web. A few iterations. There was a reason why I kind of pushed that date there, and Doug can back me up here, but there's been a few iterations on SVG. For all intents and purposes, it was fairly frozen in time back in 2001 time frame. And so there was this 1.1 which helped modularize it, and in fact, it broke it out for targeting different devices, whether it was a desktop browser or a PDA, or a Tiny for phones and things like this. But other than that, and we're still working, in fact, on the 1.1 on the second edition in the working group, it's been frozen in terms of functionality. But in that period, some of the other browser vendors started implementing it natively in the browsers. And then I had the fortunate pleasure to rejoin the working group the January of this year. And essentially along our timeline, you're here. We have now SVG support in the platform preview. Now, it's not done, and today I'm actually talking about what will be coming as well as what won't be coming. So we have a very clear path, so we can establish what is the interoperable set across the browsers that you can count on when IE9 is out there. And then as we look out to the future a bit, I kind of do this interesting diagram of thinking through our next phase in the working group from SVG and how we're going to be collaborating with HTML5 and CSS to bring all these worlds together. I mean, for example, CSS and SVG are nicely coupled. You use CSS to style SVG. CSS and HTML are nicely coupled. But now we got to start thinking about where the features overlap. SVG Tiny has audio and video. HTML has audio and video. SVG 1.2 or 1.1 has transitions and has animations and a declarative language, and CSS3 is working on that stuff. So it's all about how we bring those worlds together, and there's a special task force that we're working on to bring CSS and SVG together in HTML5. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Doug, who's going to take you on an amusing tour of what you can do with SVG today.
Thanks, Patrick. So SVG is, again, a vector graphic format. It's a web-based format. You can use it on the desktop for print, and some people do. But since it's a web-based format, my slides are completely, well, there's some HTML in there, but they're mostly SVG, some scripting, some declarative animation, and I'm going to be demoing these. This is running in a browser. So this, all of these slides, if you're interested in seeing any of how this stuff works, you can see my slides at the end. It's just a little virtual presentation software here. So I'm going to take you on a little tour of the SVG theme park, some of the features of SVG. Now this is actually, so you're thinking, wow, that's zooming really slowly, and you're right. This is a really huge file. This is about 5,000 lines long. It could be optimized, but I wanted to sort of show, actually it didn't work, but I wanted to show you sort of the progressive enhancement. You might see it a little bit, or progressive rendering, you might see it a little bit. But this is the scripting right now. I'm using declarative animation in my markup, but it's actually emulated using JavaScript. So this would work in Internet Explorer even if they don't support declarative animation. So one of the features of SVG is, again, you have the animation. And this is, we'll have a little a little path here, and I have this text running along there, and I'm animating the text along there, and that is text. You can select it, you can search it, you can find it. And I'm going to take you to the next slide. Okay, and like Patrick said, SVG Tiny 1.2 has audio and video, but on the sort of the browser-based platform, we're relying on HTML5's audio and video, and I'm just going to show you a little demo. This is sort of a mix. This is SVG mixed with the HTML audio tag, and using YUI's scripting library for the animations. Again, this is using the text path. It's just dynamically creating a text path and sort of zooming it out, increasing the font size, zooming out there. Okay, so next I'm going to take you over to the Funhouse to see some of the the cool features of SVG. So here's a photo of. It's not loading. And why is it not loading? No, that's the wrong button. Sorry. There we are. Okay. There's me and my beautiful woman. Okay, so one of the features of SVG is clipping. Some of you might be familiar with clipping. You basically define a shape, and you're able to just clip out any shape. This is a raster, but you can also do it with any vectors or with HTML. This is a feature called filters. I'm going to show you several filters. This is probably the most popular one. This is blur. You can use this for a lot of different things, and you can combine them together. So here's inverse, which is, it's hard to see up there, but it sort of does a photo negative, and you can tweak the settings on that. So all these filters are customizable. They give you filter primitives, and with the filter primitives, you can actually you can tweak the settings to get really defined things. With the CSS working group, we're working on bringing CSS filters, or we're working on bringing SVG filters to HTML in the form of CSS filters. We're going to have canned filters, so specific effects that you want to achieve, it's just a property, and very simple. So this one's doing some edge detection, and here's here's the blur and that edge detection put together. And this isn't a particularly interesting example, but it just shows you that you can do a lot of pixel-based things with the vectors to make them a little less crisp. Vector graphics tend to be very crisp, and sometimes that's not what you want. Okay, and this is. Was I done with that? Sorry. Is that the last slide? Yes, it was. Okay. So here's another example of filter effects, and this is there's a site out there called svgwow.com. I think it's linked in the slides, and it just says cool SVG demos. So this is taking this rust in the background is sort of a flat image, and then they're applying a specular lighting filter, and then and you can see it's got a drop shadow here, it's got a glow filter here, and this SVG text is actually just flat text. This is not this is actually selectable and everything, and it's just a flat image, and this 3D effect is made by using a filter effect. Okay, so let's take you back out, and let's take you over to the arcade. Okay, so this is sort of the hello world of what? Oh, there we are. This is sort of the hello world of vector programs on the web, and it's just a little shooter, a little 3D shooter. It's not fully realized, but it's running in SVG. There's a similar demo for Canvas, but it's just to show you can make games in SVG. Let's see. So who here has used SVG? Anybody? Okay, a few people. So for those of you who don't know SVG, SVG is like HTML for graphics. It's got shapes. Each shape is defined as an element, and the geometry is defined by the attributes of that element. And I'll go into that a little bit later. It can be styled with CSS or with its attributes. It's got linking. It's also got a feature called SVG view. So you can have a link in your image that goes someplace else. And you can also, when somebody links into a particular file, they can actually, they have an SVG view that can zoom into, like I showed you with the zooming earlier, they can actually zoom into a particular part of your drawing. So you can have some advanced linking into SVG as well. Like I showed you, it has raster image support. It also has multimedia support in some certain profiles, and with HTML, you can use those. It's got a scriptable DOM, just like HTML. Your skills that you're using for HTML today are very well mapped to SVG. If you're using JavaScript, you have to learn very little to actually add SVG to your toolkit. And it's dynamic, interactive, and animatable. And it can be used for images or applications. So you can use it as a standalone image. You can use it as sort of a small part of your site, or you can actually use it as a full-fledged application, either combined with HTML or by itself. So does everybody know the difference between rasters and vectors? So rasters are things like bitmaps, PNG, JPEG, GIF, BMP. So it's a set of colored dots. You have a screen, or you have a frame, and you have a set of colored dots. There's no objects. Like this line, we see this as a line, but a bitmap, the bitmap format itself doesn't see that as a line. It just sees it as a set of colored dots. And this is really good for photos and things like that. It's not showing up there really well, but this line is very pixelated because it's a smaller line and it's zoomed in. Whereas vectors, they're just instructions for drawing shapes. So each shape is its own object, and it's good for line art and illustration. With SVG, if you're just saying start here and draw here and go to here. So it scales up to whatever resolution you need. At any resolution, it's going to be the same. It's also scriptable. You can use some scripting with Canvas on bitmaps, but for the most part, vectors are much more amenable to scripting. And it's often follows smaller file sizes, especially if you're using gzip. This particular example is like 4 KB for the SVG and double that for the raster. It depends on how many elements you have, but there are often times you can get some really good file savings with these. And that 4 KB is not zipped. That would be about 1 KB or 2 KB zipped. So I'm just going to go through a few of the shapes and explain sort of the background, or not the background, but the basic shapes that you can do in SVG. First, if you draw a shape in SVG by default and you don't apply any styling, it just appears as a black shape like that. This is a path element, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So you can also, you can say, what is the fill? And you could also use CSS syntax for this, fill colon equals blah, blah, blah. So you can apply a fill to it, or you can apply a stroke to it and have no fill, or you can combine the two and and increase the stroke width. You can increase the stroke width even more. Every shape in SVG can have both a stroke and a fill. Strokes are different than borders, right? Borders only show the rectangular area around, or with rounded corners. Strokes actually follow the path of the shape. So there we are. So you can also have something called stroke dash array, and it allows you to actually make novel, not just you can have a novel pattern for what your stroke dash array is. So you can see it's sort of a little bit like Morse code around the edges there. Okay. Another one of the basic shapes is the rectangle. Has anybody been able to draw rectangles before in web pages? This is real innovation. And rounded corners. We had rounded corners before CSS. And you can see that it's applying a nice gradient there. That's a linear gradient. SVG has two types of gradients. It has a linear gradient and it has a radial gradient. Those are both examples of radial gradients. That's a circle element. You can get a nice little 3D effect just with gradients. Very lightweight, very fast to load, not much rendering overhead. And you can also use opacity. And you can see I sort of achieved a neon effect there with that ellipse by fading into black with that last gradient there and just using opacity. Here's another example of opacity. You've got a polyline and a polygon. A polygon is just a set of lines. It doesn't have to be a regular polygon like that. It can be any shape. And a polyline is just like a polygon, but it doesn't close itself. So you can leave it open like this. You can see this part doesn't have a stroke. And you can see the opacity. It's changing the color right there because it's using opacity. Oop. Oh. I keep doing that. Sorry. OK, so this is a path element. And I'm actually going to show you very briefly what the syntax is. Inspect element. So there's a path element. There's the. You probably can't see that. How do I do that? Do hold Option? No. What is it? Control? Yeah, there we go. So basically, you just say. I can't use my mouse. That sucks. You can see that it says, basically, it says start at this point, draw a cubic Bezier here, draw another cubic Bezier, draw a straight line, and then at the very end, you see that Z. It says, OK, now close the path. So it's very, it's kind of verbose for what that is, but it's actually very. You're not going to be drawing these by hand. You're probably either going to use an authoring tool, like a drawing tool. I draw them by hand, but I'm crazy. But you can actually, with gzip compression, actually that zips down really well. So this isn't a shape. This is another element. It's called a use element. So it treats this path as a symbol, and you can reuse that. So if you use a use element, you can take that original path and you can say, I want to change the color and I want to change the size here. You can say, OK, I'll do it again. I've just got the stroke here. I'm applying that same sort of neon gradient. Let's see. And so the use is actually really useful. I didn't use it in that big image I showed you, but if I had used that for one of those trees, I could have duplicated those. And when I did a test, if I had used all uses instead of having duplicate copies of each tree, I would have saved the file size by about 2 to 3 times. So it's very useful when you're reusing elements because it's less verbose. So in SVG, text is text. It's readable, it's selectable, it's indexable, it's searchable. You can find it in a web page. Different UIs differ in how exactly they allow you to do that, but it's also stylable. You can style the fill and the stroke. Just like with any other shape, text and SVG can take both a fill and a stroke, or both. It also supports web fonts. And this is just a platform feature, right? This includes WAF font format, TrueType, OpenType, and there's also a feature called SVG fonts that's native to SVG that you can also use in some browsers. It's not completely widely supported yet. And you can also, again, show text along a path. All of these fonts are WAF fonts, and it really allows you to have a really rich image. And it's actually really useful for logos because if you want, if you instead or logos or header graphics, rather than using just static images, if you use either SVG combined with other things or WAF fonts or web fonts, you can actually make all your text searchable and indexable, not just those things that that are normal HTML text. And this is actually really good for SEO, if any of you are interested in that, which I'm sure none of you are, because you all like to hide in little caves. So SVG has some of the basics about the transforms, or some of the basics about the drawing. SVG draws everything on a coordinate grid. And so when you draw a shape, you're saying, start at point X and Y, and then go over here and do these other things over at Y 100, X 250, or whatever. So with transforms, you actually can change the underlying coordinate grid to deform the shape into something that you want. So translate lets you move things. And again, you're moving the entire coordinate grid, not just the shape. Rotate, again, you can do rotations. You can scale things up. There's a gotcha with scale. When you scale things up, they also move because the entire coordinate grid moves. So you see that it's not just right at the center point. It's also scaling. So you have to combine scale with translate if you want it to zoom just right around the exact same location, around the same center point. You've got skew and skew X and skew Y. These allow you to do sort of pseudo 3D transformations. SVG doesn't have 3D transformations right now. However, we're working with a CSS working group to add what are called non-affine transformations. And that should allow things like Star Wars text. And this is a matrix. It's a more complicated transform, but it's also more powerful. And it lets you flip things around. You can really distort the image there. SVG also has support for various metadata formats. In fact, any metadata format, because of namespaces, you can use any metadata format you want. You can use RDF, RDFA, microdata, microformats. And by enclosing RDF or any metadata into your drawing, you can actually make your individual objects contain their own data. And that can actually be used for data-driven graphics. So here, this little guy, he understands what elements he's associated with. So you can actually make a user interface that actually understands what that object itself can do based on its metadata. So I mentioned animation. I mentioned the details of how I'm using animation in this illustration. And that, by the way, that was declarative animation there. It's just some simple declarations that say, OK, when you mouse over this, do this without using script. So this is actually in places where they don't allow script, you can still use animation where it's supported. Animation, there's declarative animation in SVG. CSS is also adding declarative animation. Declarative just means markup-based, not script-based. So Smile and CSS, and as Patrick said, we're working with the CSS working group to resolve and make sure there's one underlying animation model that everybody can use. There's also scripted animation, and I mentioned that I'm using a Smile emulator in this demo. There's also Raphael, which is a really great script library that lets you draw SVG. I'll tell you more about Raphael in a moment. There's also easing with key splines. So if you saw the Silverlight demos, they showed you some nice easing effects, and you can do similar things in SVG. Do any of you out there do animation? OK, a couple people. Well, easing just lets you have nicer movements, right? So these are all moving slightly different. They all have slightly different movement patterns, and especially like the bounce and elastic and these two effects. And these were created with a script library called Raphael that makes it very easy to create these animations. So one of the nice things about SVG being part of the web platform is that you can use all the things in the web platform as they become available in that platform. So the geolocation API, anywhere it's supported, where SVG is also supported, you can also use it in SVG. So the geolocation API, for those who don't know, it gets your location information, geographical information, and it does it with a lot of different device-specific mechanisms. I won't go into that here, but it's targeted use for web applications. So here, just to tell you a little bit about what's going on here, I'm clicking here. Firefox says, hey, is this web application allowed to see your location? So I'm going to go ahead and say, sure, I'll share my location. And I turned off the internet. I'm an idiot. I'm going to show you this demo at the end after Patrick, but it's super cool. You should all clap right now because it's awesome. Thank you. I wisely said I'm not going to rely on the internet for anything in this demo, and then I forgot I had this slide. Okay, idiot. But you can also use SVG combined with HTML the last slide was leading to this slide, and I feel like an idiot now. But so this is an HTML video running inside SVG, and you've got little controls here that I'm not going to bother to use. But you can add SVG controls. You can style it however you want. This is also an example of fallback. So I've got this little octopus image, and it's falling back. I'm using OGG, and if OGG isn't supported, it falls back to an MPEG format. And if HTML is not supported, it actually falls down to the SVG video element. So if you're using this on a mobile device that supports SVG, if it doesn't support HTML in SVG, it might still support the video element. So you can actually fall all the way back down to pure SVG support. So SVG is also data-driven. You can do lots of data-driven things. This is the point at which I said, I'm not going to rely on having to go up to a server to get the data. So I'm pretending to be a server here. Let's just pretend that this could be JSON. I wrote it up as XML, but this is just some data, some chart data that or some data about some statistics. And so I'm pretending that I'm downloading it from the server right now. And you can see there's an example of that data-driven. Each of these bar graphs actually knows what its value is and its label. And so as I mouse over it, it's containing that metadata. And I'm displaying it. And I can also change it to, like, if I don't like that flat style, I can change 3D. I can change the format. And so I can hide and show different things. Okay. So, and here's another example of SVG being used with the web platform. This is, who here has heard of CSS media queries? CSS media queries is a really awesome technology that allows you to say that, well, SVG itself is scalable and stylable, and so it's inherently has those properties. CSS media queries let you pick, hey, if something's at this size, I only want to do this. If something is this resolution, I only want to do this. If the display format is this, I want to change the styling of this. And this works in HTML and CSS, so you can combine the two and make nice reusable components. So every image on here, from the site ID up here to this image to these little bullet points, is the same image. So it's cached once. And using media queries, here I have there's no opacity. Here you can see it's got a transparency effect. But up here it wasn't appropriate. So I said at this size, don't use that transparency. And here I just lopped off that logo part completely because it wasn't appropriate for that size of the icon. You can use one graphic. For logos, for sites, things like that, you can use one graphic throughout your site. It's cached. It's a nice little bonus. And SVG is also accessible. I mentioned that text is text. And also, there's something called ARIA. Who here has heard of ARIA? Anybody? Yay, good for you. ARIA is accessible rich internet applications, and I hope everybody starts using them. If you're doing any kind of styling, creating custom controls in HTML or SVG, you should be aware of ARIA. Who can tell me what the difference between these two buttons is? Anybody? Close. I thought somebody was going to say one's red and one's green. You guys are lame. This one is not a button because it doesn't have this attribute on it, role equals button. If you just put role equals button, suddenly accessibility APIs know that this thing is going to be a button. This works in SVG or HTML. And you can style it using CSS. These are both use elements. I just said, okay, if the role is button and it's a use element, make the fill green. Okay? So there's also a property called ARIA checked, and that says, has this control been activated? If it's not activated, then it doesn't do anything special. But you can toggle that via script. And when I toggle that, ARIA checked equals true. Suddenly, I have another CSS rule, and it says fill equals gold. So I'm changing this just with CSS. And also, for accessible things, make sure that all your controls are tab focusable. That's just a little gimme. OK, so a lot of you have probably heard of sustainability, sustainable ecosystem. And it's got aspects, the social, the economic, and the environment, and how they interact. This also applies to web technology. SVG is part of a sustainable web. these technologies, these open technologies, they're going to be around for the next 50 years. This is a responsible format to use if you're planning on making something for government sites or even something you want to be around for longer than, say, 2 or 3 years. We've all had brittle pages that broke, and this is hopefully not going to be one of those problems. So how do you create SVG? For regular images, there's things like Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape. Inkscape is an open source equivalent, essentially, of Adobe Illustrator. But actually, every vector graphics program already exports SVG. So you can already do it today with any program that you're already using. And for dynamic content animations, Amaya is a tool. It's an open source tool for animations and other things. There's a Beatware mobile designer and an Ikivo animator. Those are both commercial packages. I'd really love to see like Expression or other Microsoft tools like Blend export SVG. I think it'd be a great win. So there's also the other option. Any real coder uses. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. You can actually create SVG by hand, and I do it embarrassingly often, but you really should use a tool. And here's such a tool. Here's a little drawing tool. Let's make a little shape, and we'll add. That didn't work out. Let's see, Control Z. Okay, so let's make another little rectangle. Let's just add, like, make a little 3D effect. Pretend that it's 3D. And so this is an SVG editor. And this SVG editor is written in SVG. This is an SVG and HTML page. And this is a web-based thing. This is a free open source package called SVG Edit. And it allows you to create shapes. You can use it for a whiteboard. You can use it however you want. And it's a full-fledged SVG editor written in SVG and HTML. So in terms of interoperability, this is a big question. The first browser that supported SVG natively was Opera. And then came Firefox shortly thereafter. And then in quick order, Safari and Chrome both started supporting SVG. And it even works on mobile devices. So on the iPhone, it's got support for declarative and scripted animation of SVG, and it supports SVG natively. And but that was not. I mean, so it's a really good story. It's sort of the one web story where you code a web page once, and with some adaptive techniques like using media queries, things like that, you can make that work for mobile devices as well. But there was one major problem, and that was it wasn't OneWeb because SVG did not work in Internet Explorer. And now it does, which I think, I keep doing that. I'm an idiot. Which I think surprised all of us. That was going to be a great delivery. I practiced in my room last night. But for those of you who recognize that Internet Explorer 6 through 8 still exist, you can use other techniques. There's a project called SVG Web, which, amusingly enough, takes SVG that it encounters in a web page. You just link to a little script library called SVG Web. You link to that, and if it sees that your browser doesn't support SVG, it takes the SVG and it renders it in Flash. And then there's several that do the similar sort of thing with VML. There's Raphael, which is my favorite. Dojo is an older one, but it's still good. And Ample SDK is another good one. If you can control your environment and you can tell people what plugin to install, have them do Google Chrome Frame, but I never recommend anybody tell people to install a plugin. I think that's lame. And fortunately now, increasingly, we won't have to. Okay. So what is the future of SVG? Closer integration with HTML and CSS. We already talked about our task force, and we're trying to make sure that all these features that are available in SVG are also available in HTML and CSS. So again, the declarative animation. And when I put this in the future, because I think declarative animation is still one of those things that needs to be more widely supported, and we're going to be looking at that. And I think Patrick is going to be trying to work with us to make sure that we have a good declarative animation model that we only have to implement once. We don't have to. People don't have to learn a new thing every time. And so, probably in future releases of IE, you will see that. Improved DOM APIs, just making it easier to work with. This actually needs to happen to the web platform in general. It needs to be more like a native running jQuery. And we're also, if you know the Canvas API, we're also interested in making a shared graphics API. So you draw once, and you can either have it output as SVG or as Canvas. More effects. We're going to do the sort of the 3D transforms, like I mentioned. More gradients to let you do cooler effects. Vector effects, which allow you to have variable stroke and, combinations. So you can make like double strokes, or you can custom build your strokes. And it's really useful for things like symbols or pretty much any kind of graphics, actually. And then more color functionality. We're looking at adding graph-type connectors, so you can make flowcharts and things like that natively that have the semantics of a flowchart. Parameterized components, where we're tossing things. You can actually say, OK, I want to change these things about this single SVG file. We're adding new basic shapes and more. And so my call to you is get involved. There's a public working group. There's members of the working group, but then the public is welcome to participate. If you send your feedback with your feature requests or whatever you're thinking about SVG to the public working group, then we'll get back to you. You should use SVG in your projects. You can use SVG in your projects today. Using these script libraries especially, you can plan for the future working with Internet Explorer 9. Also, one of the things that I was really impressed about by the SVG community, which I've been in for the past 10 years, is they always shared their code. Everybody, this is the whole web ethos of view source, and SVG is a great view source technology. It basically helps build the web. It helps people learn. It helps people teach. It helps people make good sites. Anybody out there who's an implementer, make SVG tools. Or if you have tools that could be output SVG, do that. And also, there's an SVG Open is an SVG conference in Paris in August. And so you could go to your boss and say, hey, I know I hate Paris. I don't want to go to Paris, but I got to go to this conference. It's really a pain. And I'm sure they will give you funding. So thanks for your attention. I'm Doug Scheppers. I'm the Rich Web Clients Activity Lead at W3C. There's my email. There's my personal web page. I'm on Twitter as Sheppazoo. And some of the design stuff I got some help by a company called Iconologic, and thank them. So thank you.
So really appreciate Doug coming out. You know, I think that if you've been to any of the talks that we've been doing, you've heard a few messages over and over again. Our commitments to standards, our commitments to interoperability, our investment in HTML5 and the hardware accelerated HTML5. So we invited Doug to come out here and present a bunch of stuff about SVG, and he's the right guy to do it. The thing that is interesting to me is I worked quite a bit in terms of dev tools and frameworks, and you end up building all these sort of primitives or layers of frameworks, and it always amazes me what people come out with in terms of what they can do with them. So I want to just give you a way that we thought of approaching SVG and the way we sort of have packaged what we're going to be delivering in IE9. The initial spec first kind of was targeted, or at least used mostly, by corporate customers creating engineering documents, sort of these static documents, because they wanted that graphics fidelity. And in fact, some government institutions in today's day are requiring SVG as a submission format, and we're seeing that more and more as time progresses. The other key sort of scenario we see for the web for SVG has to do in the category of charts and maps. And in this case, it's about, and Doug showed some charting there, you know, if you hit a web page today that you sort of have a personalized graph with, that server will render that image and deliver it to you. So if instead it could just render you some lightweight XML to deliver that graphic to you, you're offloading a lot of work on the server, which is a great thing. And as you saw, there's an interactivity with it, so it's not just it's not just a rasterized image that you maybe have to do some fancy. It is a retained model graphics system. And then we also saw some where it's just like we use media queries to create one image that's reused as a bullet pointer as a larger image, and so it's been used on web pages just as images. Sometimes it's a smaller format. Sometimes you just want the graphics fidelity. You know, it's sort of. You know, I got this one here. And I have a demo of I was thinking my internet connection might not be working either. But
no, I turned mine off.
It's great for large-scale images as well, and I'll show you an example of something that was SVG Open last year. And then it was also remarked about the animation and things like that. And there's lots of libraries out there. There's the declarative smile. There's support for browsers that don't have the declarative and things like that. So here's the heat map of what we're delivering today with the platform preview in terms of SVG support, as well as what we intend to deliver in IE9. And I think the only thing that Doug was just bending my arm in the other room to get some filter effects in there. But at this point in the game, this is what we're delivering. And this isn't atypical. We looked at the scenarios that we were going to deliver, and these are the things that you kind of need to get it off the ground, need to have that interoperable set to build those scenarios we looked at the other page. And I think that for filter effects, for example, that gold emboss, which just looked really, really nice, required 17 filters just to get that SVG. So it has to do with let's raise the abstraction on those filters and let's get them right. The SVG fonts, there was a handful of 4 or 5 different font categories you can go after. And then the declarative animation, one of the things I want to make sure that we do is make sure it aligns with the HTML5 and aligns with what CSS is doing. And until then, we have those script libraries that can sniff the smile that's on the page if you care to and get that declarative animation. If you've seen any of the demos that have been shown yet today on SVG and IE9, those are all just done with JScript. So in terms, well, let me just, I'm trying to figure out, I got 8 minutes. Boy,
Are you serious?
Yeah, you hogged me.
Oh, dude, I'm sorry.
Let me show just a quick couple of demos, and what I hope to do is get some of these up. On the platform preview site, there's a handful of these, and you may have seen them, but I'm going to just go through a couple of them. I'll be working to try to get more and more of these up. This one goes to the sort of fidelity of the graphics. This actually comes out of a CAD software at Microsoft that generates our floor plans. And, oh, excuse me. And this goes to the heart of where SVG began. And I can zoom in. I'll use this zoom. And you can see how, the great detail in that map that looked like somewhat of a blur. You can see the incredible amount of detail there. You're looking at thousands and thousands of objects. Let me just zoom back out. We talked about the business charts, and the one thing, I'll show you this interesting one. In terms of practical application of the use and def, this is very interesting. This is using, the spider chart here is drawing this one of those segments, and then it's using a use and rotating it each time to get that full graph. So it's really a light way to build that background graph. I love this one. I discovered this we were looking for what is a good use case for org charts on the web. And we passed through the U.S. Department of Energy. And the thing that kind of caught me off guard was as I zoomed in, because this is a raster image, it is literally almost impossible to tell who's doing what there. And so in terms of what we'd love to see agencies or sites like this do, is if I switch that to an SVG, and now I just sort of layered an SVG map in there, as I zoom in, that fidelity is maintained, and I can see exactly what's going on in that. So that's a really sweet spot for when we think about the features that we're shipping. Those are the kind of scenarios we want to hit. This is the HTML5 SVG, the future of where we're thinking where we think that it's going. I talked about the earlier wave of DHTML in the late 90s. What we're seeing is this wave of rich graphics, and we want them to be standardized. And this comes out of Michael Neutze, who runs sort of the German election maps, and this is a snapshot of the 2004. And what he's got is great hover over interactivity that changes the HTML. I can also use the HTML to change the SVG. And so this is actually, he's been using this since 2004, and he always sort of, if I knew my German well, I think this is voter turnout, and you can, by party, see who's doing other things. And there's some sort of functionality here I wish I understood, but you can also change it and sort of do some what-if scenarios on that. So that was a lot of fun. This one's rather, I'm going to just talk to this one. We're seeing a lot of servers starting to output SVG, whether it's Oracle. This is SQL using the geospatial support, running through a very thin library. We've got these hover over details. And I'm going to zoom. Excuse me. Well, I'll use this instead. Come on, baby. Oh, I zoomed too much. Ted, I need a new laptop. Anyway, the incredible detail that they have here is actually the reason why that map looked kind of flat is that the geospatial takes into account the curvature of the Earth. And if you get a chance to if we can get some of these demos up, you can zoom in. You can see the incredible detail that they have there. I'll leave him alone. This is actually an interesting case where we have to work with a working group to think about how different defaults change. And this is actually lifting an existing physics engine using SVG circles with opacity with a background image. And if I run this in the platform preview, what we kind of think is that experience in HTML, that SVG should flow out. And this is just a simple flag by default. So it's sort of this, whether or not it should go out. If I run that same experience in most browsers, because it's the way the spec would say it's doing it, you'll see it gets clipped into that area. Okay, I'll let that one run for a while. That's actually the proxy. That's not me. That's not Firefox. So, well, I'll leave that one alone. No, now I kind of need them. Yeah, sorry about that. So there's this great poster on the SVG Open site. When you download it, it's an image, and it takes about, depending on your connection, maybe 60 seconds, 30 seconds to download. Because this is a poster-sized print. And then there's this great SVGZ format of it, and it's just there instantly.
The poster is a raster.
Yeah, that's right.
So it takes a long time. With the SVG version, it doesn't matter how big you print something out. It's going to be the same fidelity.
Oh, that's an internet connection as well. Forgive me.
Oh, you have it.
Yeah. So I don't know if anybody's had a chance to take a look at this. This is a lot of fun. This is done by one of our program managers on a plane. And this is that game scenario. And he's also put in some, I just love that. Looks like you're trying to shoot some meteoroids. Would you like to lower shields or write a letter? Anyway, that's the sort of scenarios we thought of when we were looking at them. And what I want to do now, excuse me, is click through my entire presentation.
Which I totally stepped on.
And talk about how to get started with IE, IE, the platform preview. So there's various methods of which you can embed SVG into a web page. There's the SVG in HTML5. This is simply an angle bracket SVG in your HTML page. That's supported by our platform preview. There's also the .svg extension, which is kind of a document format, but it's as rich as Doug's presentation was almost entirely, I think, in .svg format.
Yeah, almost all of it was SVG. I just had some HTML where I wanted to show HTML features.
And then there's SVG and XHTML, which we now support XHTML and IE. And I think there's a little bit of an interesting battle of who wins there, but we've done both, so you can do SVG and XHTML. And then it's interesting because a lot of sites today will use the object tag to embed it. So they'll also use embed, so we chose to at least push object out there. And then we'll do the remaining support for SVG in IE9, in iframe, embed, image, and SVGZ. In terms of structure, what I'm looking to call out here as people start playing with the platform preview, there's no viewbox support. Otherwise, most of the structures is there in terms of def, use, G for grouping, image. The reason I call it viewbox is sometimes it reshapes your stuff and you're not able to, well, hey, what happened to that page? So that's sort of a watch for that one. We have, in terms of the presentation, the shapes, the paths, everything that Doug's been showing is all there, the filling, the stroking, the color. The one gotcha, again, when you look at text, there's no T-span support, so that usually makes the text disappear in the preview, so if you just remove your T-spans, the text will come back. And then we have all the interactivity and styling. You can use DOM L2. You can use the SVG DOM for all the elements we have out there. We have most of the events online. And for every element that we ship, we have those presentation attributes and CSS styling. In terms of transforms, we have translate that Doug showed to skew X, skew Y, scale and rotate. And it's really interesting how people use these to actually create some pretty fancy graphics out there. So in terms of, we talked about a little bit in terms of getting bits out to developers every 8 weeks. I'm not claiming that these are coming in 8 weeks, but our next set of things we're looking at is we'll have those gradients. They're absent now, so if you see an image on the web that has a gradient, it's just going to not have that gradient. The clipping and the masking and the compositing that Doug was doing earlier, the links and views where you can kind of do that zoom in really nice and with defining that view. And then we have the remainder of text. Text is kind of a lightweight implementation right now, transformations, colors, and the rest of the interactivity and things. So what I'm wanting to do is I want people to download the preview. If you want to do some learning, W3 Schools has a great site on SVG to do some learning.
Not
affiliated.
W3C.
Not affiliated. Build your own SVG. It's amazing what people within my group have done with SVG. Some of those demos come from them. I've created this Facebook group called SVG and Internet Explorer. I'll be probably watching it daily. I think I've already posted several things over the last couple of days, getting people excited, getting myself excited. This is where I want to see, what do you want? What do you need from this? What's working not now? Or, do we have our priorities correct? And then there's a lot of those frameworks out there that are IE sniffing. So we need to sort of work together to figure out how to go ahead and surface SVG when you see IE. And another one is, help us make sure we are hitting that interoperability. We want to remove all of the if-defs, all of the these different browsers. This is what the SVG group I find is really good about. It's like if they find something that's not quite working or somebody raises something, they quickly fix it because we all want to be on the same page what comes with SVG. And that's it. So I appreciate your time, and I think we have a little bit of time to take some questions.
They are still in the working group. They're not particularly active right now.
Why did they unsupport their IE plugin?
Because they bought Macromedia. I guess they decided. I mean, they still support it in Adobe Illustrator. They still support it in other tools that they have. They decided that they said that it was starting to get supported in browsers. They didn't feel they needed to keep supporting the Adobe Viewer.
Are you asking, is there SVG support in Silverlight? I'm sorry, I'm a little. I have so.
How many features
Oh, what's the over?
how deep support of SVG we can expect in Silverlight?
So Silverlight, are you talking about? So I'm trying to understand your question. Silverlight has a declarative method for drawing graphics and text. Oh, so I think I did see an announcement of support for SVG in Silverlight. I don't have the answer to that, but I will get back to you if you come up right afterwards.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I saw a little announcement on the web about that. So
that'd be great.
What about what tricks of performance do you do with SVG on IE9? I mean, if you do something with a canvas, you will do double buffering yourself because you want the animation to be smooth and fast. Do we need to worry about it in SVG, or does it handle that for you?
I think the answer from my perspective is if you want SVG to be fast, you run it on IE9. Because the way I talked about it, I had this Channel 9 interview. It's like every time I talk to the developers about how we're going to deliver a feature, how are we going to get this to draw through our different graphics library, they just said, well, that's just supported by DirectX. We just pass it through. So I kind of call it this parse and burn kind of thing. It's like, here's a path, there's a geometry, write it to the chip, and it's done.
And what about the other browsers?
I would say test in other browsers as well, because you might actually find that it's faster in Internet Explorer, and if you want people to have a good experience, test your stuff in other browsers as well.
That may lead you to decide not to go with SVGs if IE9 is fast but the others are not.
Well, I didn't say the others aren't fast. I'm just saying that you should test to make sure. There are lots of ways to optimize your SVG files, and there's information on the web about that. Post something to the Facebook group, and we'll get people saying how adding tips on how to optimize your SVGs for performance.
I'm seeing a lot of stuff out there using Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to do that stuff, do we just sort of approximate using a JavaScript library
You mean? Sorry, I don't understand the question.
The canvas tag.
I understand about the. I don't understand what your question is.
Is there, let's see if in the future, the way to do that, is that just going to be sort of using one of the associated query or equivalent libraries as a
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's one way of doing it. Yeah, is if you just want to program to a. The nice thing about the libraries is they provide a high level abstraction, and it can output to whatever format you want. So that is a good way of abstracting out and making sure that your site is bulletproof. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with SVG that you can't do with Canvas. So I personally like coding natively SVG, but I also like Canvas. Canvas is a cool technology.
I think there's use cases for both.
There's use cases for both.
That's what it is.
It's not complete overlap.
Yeah.
just to be clear, we're not saying canvas in the foreseeable future.
You mean in IE? I don't think they've announced anything.
So we're not done with IE9. You don't see all the feature sets today. We'll continue to drop every 8 weeks. And just as an SVG, we have more features. We'll see more features in other areas.
No, there's not. It'd be script. You can do. There's a technology called XBL. That's it's sort of on the back burner, but a lot of the browser vendors are really interested in XBL, and that is a data binding language specifically intended for that. You can use SVG with XBL. XML binding language is its name, and it's. I think Firefox is really looking at that. I think I saw some interest from. I don't know, but no, not natively, but through other mechanisms there are, and you can do data binding with script, which is not as nice, but still.
What is your favorite SVG drawing package?
My favorite is Inkscape because I'm kind of an open source guy, and it's open source, and it's its native format is SVG. That's all it does. I think it can export to other things, but that's really what it does. And so, and it's continually being improved, and it's a really active community.
I have to agree. Inkscape is so focused on SVG, it doesn't introduce different concepts. But for example, that little clippy I showed was an Adobe trace of the path. Visio outputs SVG. I mean, there's a lot of things that output SVG.
I use Inkscape myself. Is there any concern about how some of these packages have their own? They seem to have proprietary extensions to SVG.
They usually have some metadata. But the key is actually Inkscape just introduced a save as pure SVG,
Yeah.
which will strip all that out.
Yeah. Oh, just to let you know what's going on with this slide. So we've got SVG.
Hey, you've got a connection.
Yeah, SVG, and we're using foreign object. We're inside the foreign object. Foreign objects is like saying, hey, there's HTML in here, is basically. We've got HTML. We're hitting Bing Maps. And we're sort of transforming it. So this is an SVG frame here, and then we're clipping it, and we're transforming we're tilting the HTML. So that's HTML, and you can see that we've got a bridge going between the HTML and the SVG. So if I so you can go back and forth between the documents, and this is actually one single document. This is not referencing an external HTML page. This HTML page is part of the SVG document.
So we have to wrap up. That deck we just presented has a link. It's going to be posted on the MIX site and has a link to Doug's demo, which is live on the internet as well. So it's a great tour. I'll warn you, because it exercises all the features of SVG, you cannot run it in IE9. You have to use an alternate browser to see all the interesting features that are in SVG.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.